Hello again, my fiber friends. I'm ReRe, and this is Exploration Crochet, part of the Yarn Over Hook network. In this episode, we're talking about an organization that never officially existed on paper. During World War I, millions of Americans answered the Red Cross's call to serve. Most people remember the nurses, some remember the ambulance drivers, but almost no one remembers the little instruction booklets, the propaganda campaign, and the nationwide volunteer network that helped transform ordinary home crafters into one of the largest civilian production forces in history. And while knitting often takes center stage in this story, with crochet only being mentioned literally around the edges, the systems created by the Red Cross would eventually shape organized crochet charity work for generations to come. Before World War I, crochet charity work certainly existed. Church groups made items for fundraisers, women's organizations donated handmade goods to hospitals and orphanages, and charity bazaars sold crocheted lace, collars, baby garments, and household items to raise money for good causes. But these efforts were mostly local. There was no national framework, no standardized patterns, no organized distribution network, no system capable of coordinating thousands of makers at once. If you wanted to help, you helped your local community. That, however, would change dramatically in 1917. This, my friends, is the story of the American Red Cross, Florence Marshall, the Knit Your Bit campaign, and the birth of what I like to call the Crochet Corps. When the United States entered World War I in April of 1917, the American Red Cross suddenly faced a problem no one had ever encountered before. The military needed enormous quantities of handmade garments, sweaters, mufflers, wristlets, helmets, or what we would call balaclavas, and socks. They needed comfort items as well as hospital supplies. The question wasn't simply how to make them. The question was how to organize millions of civilians to make them correctly. The American Red Cross Executive Council recognized both the opportunity and the challenge. It established the Women's Advisory Committee, which soon created the Women's Bureau in May of 1917. To lead it, they chose a woman named Florence Marshall. Now, Florence Marshall isn't a household name today, but she may have been one of the most important organizers in the entire wartime Red Cross. Marshall came from the world of vocational education and women's training. She understood something that would prove essential to the war effort. Good intentions are not enough. People need organization, people need instruction, people need a system. Her job was deceptively simple. Figure out how ordinary civilians could systematically aid the military. The solution she developed would eventually mobilize millions of volunteers. Under Florence Marshall's leadership, the Women's Bureau became the command center for female volunteer work. And what emerged was astonishing. Marshall and her colleagues weren't simply asking women to make. They were building a nationwide volunteer production network. Today, we'd call it project management. In 1917, it was revolutionary. And one of the biggest challenges was consistency. Everyone made things differently. Different yarns, different needle sizes, different dimensions, different techniques. Now that might be fine for a family sweater. It was not fine for military supply. A sweater intended for a soldier in France couldn't be left to chance. So, under the direction of Florence Marshall, the Red Cross developed standardized instructions. The result was American Red Cross ARC 400. Officially titled Instructions for Knitting, ARC 400 established approved materials, dimensions, tools, and construction methods. There is a digital copy available on the interwebs, and I will leave a link for it in the show notes. Today, all that sounds perfectly normal. In 1917, it was groundbreaking. Imagine trying to organize millions of volunteers without email, computers, spreadsheets, or even a universal standard for yarn. ARC 400 became the answer. And this is standardization that predates the Craft Yarn Council by over 60 years. The Red Cross supplied approved yarn, issued standardized patterns, created its own needle sizing system, inspected finished garments, and distributed them through a nationwide network of chapters. By 1918, it had effectively created one of the first large-scale standardized maker communities in American history. If Florence Marshall's greatest contribution was organization, ARC 400 was her organization's most powerful tool. Of course, a system only works if people participate. The Red Cross launched one of the most successful volunteer recruitment campaigns in history. Its slogan was simple: knit your bit. The message appeared everywhere. Propaganda posters urged Americans to help the troops. Women's magazines published patterns and instructions. Newspapers promoted local Red Cross workrooms. Yarn manufacturers joined the effort. The result was a remarkable collaboration between humanitarian organizations, publishers, manufacturers, and volunteers. Everyone had a role to play. Now, we don't know exactly what percentage of Americans could knit in 1917. What we do know is that knitting was common enough for the Red Cross to mobilize millions of volunteers quickly, yet uncommon enough that the organization had to launch nationwide training programs for beginners. One of the remarkable aspects of the Red Cross campaign is that they repeatedly emphasized teaching beginners. Contemporary accounts describe knitting classes for novices, workplace instruction programs, school programs for children, men learning to knit during lunch breaks, Red Cross workrooms specifically organized to teach newcomers. Even the Butterick Publishing Company famously reported that employees learned to knit in just 2 half-hour lessons and then produced hundreds of garments for sailors. Heck, if most people already knew how to knit, these instructional efforts would have been unnecessary. The Red Cross wasn't just looking for makers. It was looking for people willing to become makers. The organization assumed that many volunteers would need training and built instruction directly into the system. Florence Marshall's genius wasn't simply organizing people who already possessed a skill. It was creating a system that could turn complete beginners into productive volunteers in a matter of days. The Red Cross didn't ask, "Can you knit?" It asked, "Can you learn?" And millions of Americans answered yes. By February 1919, the results were extraordinary. When Florence Marshall began work in 1917, the Red Cross had 562 chapters. 20 months later, by the end of World War I, it had 3,724 chapters. Adult membership had reached 20 million. Junior Red Cross membership, that's ages 6 to 18, had reached 11 million. That's 30 million Americans connected through a single humanitarian organization. Imagine having 30 million followers on your socials after 20 months. And not just followers, but people who were willing to give of their time and their talent. And the results of that effort? The numbers still sound unbelievable today. And since the American Red Cross kept meticulous records, I will read those numbers to you now. During the 20-month period of American involvement in World War I, Red Cross volunteers produced 7,142 Afghans, 985,841 balaclavas, 901,830 mufflers, 3,592,126 pairs of socks, 4,208,935 sweaters, 1,199,420 wristlets, and 3,801 miscellaneous items. That's more than 4 million sweaters, more than 3.5 million pairs of socks, and nearly 1 million balaclavas, every one of them made by hand. And speaking of those hands, in the June 1918 issue of the American Red Cross magazine, there is a picture of a group of girls from Chinatown knitting. The caption reads, "They knit sweaters and the more difficult garments. Their work is exquisite, perhaps the best the Red Cross gets." The issue also includes a picture of little boys making wooden knitting needles. I'll leave a link to the National World War I Museum and Memorial where you can see those images in the show notes. Interesting side note, President Woodrow Wilson kept a flock of sheep on the lawn at the White House from 1918 to 1920. Some of the wool was auctioned to raise money for the war effort, but some was also used directly by the Red Cross and its volunteers for military garments. But what about crochet? The historical record overwhelmingly focuses on knitting because during World War I, most military garments were knitted. The official Red Cross booklets were largely knitting manuals, but if you read those patterns, rows of single crochet were instructed to be added around neck openings and some armholes. So crochet was never absent from the movement. Additionally, crocheters participated in relief work, finishing work, household items, comfort items, and later Red Cross charitable projects. Most importantly, makers as a whole inherited the infrastructure. The systems that allowed millions of knitters to coordinate their efforts became the blueprint for organized fiber charity work of every kind, including crochet. The armistice happened in November of 1918, but the story of making and the Red Cross did not end. Following the ending of the war, the Red Cross and its maker volunteers worked hard on the domestic front during the outbreak of the Spanish flu. But influence from Florence Marshall and ARC 400 is still felt today. When we look at organizations like Project Linus, Warm Up America, Knots of Love, Knitted Knockers, and countless local charity projects, we see similar elements: standardized patterns, approved materials, quality requirements, collection sites, distribution networks, and most importantly, a core of volunteer makers. The names may have changed, the missions may have shifted, but the framework remains remarkably familiar. The Red Cross didn't invent charity crafting. People had been making and donating handmade items for generations. What the Red Cross did was organize it, scale it, standardize it, and prove that thousands of strangers could work together through shared patterns and shared purpose. We often tell the story of World War I through generals, politicians, and battles. But another equally compelling story was unfolding in living rooms, church basements, schools, and Red Cross workrooms across America. It was a story of how a pattern booklet, a humanitarian organization, and millions of volunteers changed the way fiber artists work together. Florence Marshall never commanded troops, but she did help build a volunteer army measured in stitches, a corps that would be called upon for service again. 21 years later, on September 1st, 1939, when Germany invaded Poland, World War II began. The Global Red Cross jumped into action with blood drives. And after the U.S. officially entered the war 2 years later on December 8, 1941, the U.S. War Production Board designated the American Red Cross as the sole clearing agency for all military knitting projects, granting the organization priority access to the nation's restricted wool supply. The mobilization of 8 million women volunteers and roughly 20 million junior volunteers produced 372 million relief articles and 63 million garments. Notably, Bear Brand Yarns partnered in publishing and promoting Red Cross-approved patterns, which included crochet and knit versions of most articles. And while it took some time, I finally found one, titled Directions for Crocheted and Knitted Articles, officially endorsed and requested by the American Red Cross and Comforts Committee of the Navy League. I'll leave a link to my blog where you can see it in the show notes. I'll also leave a link for the World War I edition of the ARC 400, so you can see how crochet was added to garments during finishing. And the Red Cross is still working with companies today. Yarnspirations, specifically Red Heart Cares, has several free Red Cross-themed patterns. In addition to blankets and pillows and a vintage crochet sweater, you'll also find a traditional Red Cross nursing outfit for an 18-inch doll and a really cool old-timey first aid kit. The link for that will be in the show notes as well. Florence Marshall helped create a model that still lives on today whenever crocheters gather to make blankets for the unhoused, or hats, wigs, and boobs for cancer patients, and let's not forget soap sacks for strangers they'll never meet. And speaking of soap sacks, Yarn Over Hook is partnering with SAC, supporting a community with kindness, to provide 1,000 soap sacks to people in need globally. If you would like to join in the effort, please visit summerstashbash.com for details. The Crochet Corps may never have officially existed, but its legacy certainly does. If you appreciate what you've been hearing, don't forget to rate, like, and subscribe at explorationcrochet.com or wherever your favorite podcast is served. This has been Exploration Crochet. Thank you so very much for listening.
K-K-K-Katy, beautiful Katy, you're the only girl that I adore. When the moon shines over the cowshed, I'll be waiting at the kitchen door.